Okay, so today we're gonna dive into something pretty fundamental to California's economy, and that is steel and aluminum.
Mm,
We've got a whole bunch of data here that's going to help us figure out, where it's going, who's using it,
yeah.
what industries are really, sucking this stuff up, and what that tells us about, the future of the state and kind of how things are developing here.
I think it's interesting to think about it too, because California is such a diverse economy.
Yeah.
You've got everything from information to real estate professional
Oh
services,
yeah.
healthcare, manufacturing, construction,
Right.
and they all kind of play into the need for these materials in different ways.
Right.
So you've got steel with its obvious strength, and then aluminum, which is prized for its lightweight.
Yeah.
And kind of seeing where each one plays a role.
Yeah, let's start with steel.
Okay.
I think nationally we see the big, consumer of steel is construction.
Right.
And that's reflected in California for sure, just a huge market.
Yeah, by 2025, the steel framing market alone is supposed to be like $3.7 billion.
Wow.
It's really pretty incredible, the scale.
Yeah, and it's all over the place. It's like
Oh, yeah.
the structural frameworks you think about,
Yeah.
support beams reinforcing bars and concrete.
Right. And this goes for both residential and non-residential construction.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
Well, non-residential is a huge market. We're
absolutely.
talking $40 trillion nationally by 2025.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
California, with so much construction going on,
Right.
definitely a big player.
And they're using steel in all these new buildings too because of the green building initiatives.
Right. They want recyclable materials, and steel is one of the most recyclable materials out there.
That's right.
So it's really a win-win in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And sadly, the wildfires that have been plaguing California,
Right.
are driving a lot of the demand in steel for rebuilding.
Unfortunately. Yeah, it's a terrible thing. But rebuilding does require materials, and steel is a big part of that.
Absolutely.
We have to think about tariffs too.
Right.
They could have an impact, but construction is pretty resilient.
It is, yeah.
So, even with those tariffs, it's still a major consumer of steel.
Right. So we talked about construction, but manufacturing's another big steel user.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, nationally, I think what, 25% of steel demand in 2021 was automotive manufacturing?
Right.
I know California doesn't have like a Detroit or anything like that, but
Oh,
we have a lot of manufacturing.
we do, and it's interesting to see how the steel industry is adapting.
Yeah.
For example, you've got the Pacific Steel Group. They're building this new micro mill in Mojave.
Right.
It's going to be the first one built in decades,
Yeah.
and it's going to be zero carbon.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. And they're going to be supplying steel for infrastructure projects, which
Wow.
is really important for the state.
That's a game changer. So it's not just construction,
Right. Notable.
it's manufacturing, and we're talking big numbers.
Huge numbers. The iron and steel manufacturing industry in California is projected to grow by $3.1 billion by 2025.
It's crazy,
Yeah,
and it's not, we have to acknowledge that producing steel takes a lot of energy.
it does. It's very energy intensive.
Yeah, natural gas, coal,
Hmm.
it's, something to think about
Yeah, it's definitely a factor.
for sure. And then, we think about transportation too.
Right.
You know, bridges, railways, they all use steel.
Obviously, yeah.
And with more money going to infrastructure projects, highways, bridges, that's going to drive up the demand for steel.
Absolutely. All those projects need steel.
Yeah, and we can't forget about agriculture.
Right.
Steel in farm buildings, barns, grow houses.
Fences, gates, irrigation systems, ventilation systems.
It's everywhere.
You need steel for all of that.
So we've got construction, manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, all using steel.
And don't forget about energy.
That's right.
Steel is really important for things like wind turbines.
Right.
And with all the public infrastructure projects that are going on,
Right.
that new mill in Mojave could be a major supplier for those projects.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what they do.
Me too.
And another trend that we're seeing is this move towards decarbonizing steel production.
Right, green steel.
Green steel, yeah,
It's a really important development.
absolutely. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about aluminum.
Okay.
Um, so nationally, building and construction is a pretty big market for aluminum.
Yeah, it's a significant end market, and it's projected to keep growing,
Yeah.
especially for things like commercial buildings and clean energy projects like solar installations.
Right, and California with its focus on clean energy,
Absolutely.
and its huge commercial sector.
Yeah.
aluminum is going to be playing a big role.
Definitely. And we're seeing more aluminum being used in things like fencing and commercial cladding.
Right.
And even in aerospace for things like workstations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty
So
versatile.
it's not just, soda cans and foil anymore.
No, not at all.
It's, really becoming a structural material.
It is, yeah.
But, we can't talk about aluminum without talking about transportation.
Right. It's the biggest consumer of aluminum nationally.
It is, and it's only going to grow.
Yeah.
I mean, with EVs becoming more popular.
Right. And California is really leading the way in the EV market.
Yeah.
And with the push for lightweighting to improve fuel efficiency,
Right.
the demand for aluminum per vehicle is going to keep going up.
That's right. And, California's got this established automotive industry.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the burgeoning EV manufacturing sector.
Right.
They're all relying on aluminum.
Absolutely. For everything from closures to body panels to chassis components.
Yeah.
And then you've got castings too.
Right.
Aluminum castings are used for all sorts of things.
Yeah. And then the aerospace industry, which is huge here in California. They're using high-grade aluminum alloys in aircraft structures.
Absolutely. Wings, fuselage, landing, gear engines all need those high-grade alloys.
So aluminum is really flying high in transportation.
It is, yeah. It's really the material of choice for a lot of those applications.
For sure, for sure. So beyond transportation, we've got manufacturing.
Right.
And, California's aluminum manufacturing sector is projected to be worth $1.6 billion by 2025.
Yeah, that's a lot of manufacturing.
It is.
And it's really crucial for things like electronics.
Right.
Aluminum's thermal and electrical conductivity.
Yeah.
Make it essential for components and housings.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important for Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
All those electronics need aluminum.
And we can't forget about HVAC units.
Right.
Aluminum's used in those for heat transfer.
Yeah, so we've got electronics and HVAC, but of course we can't forget about packaging.
Right.
I mean, it's a significant end market for aluminum nationally.
Yeah, and the demand for things like beverage cans is only increasing.
Which makes sense with California's huge consumer market.
Absolutely.
We buy a lot of stuff here.
We do.
But aluminum's not just used for, consumer goods.
Right.
It's also used in agriculture.
Yeah. Aluminum alloys are used in lightweight equipment.
Right.
And irrigation pipes.
Oh, yeah.
Although we do have to be mindful of potential corrosion issues with aluminum.
Right, right.
Especially in certain agricultural applications.
For sure, for sure. And then finally, we've got energy.
Right.
Aluminum is being used more and more in solar panels and electrical transmission lines.
Yeah, and that ties in really well with California's renewable energy goals.
Absolutely. Okay, so it sounds like we've got steel and aluminum kind of, working in different areas.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Steel provides that robust strength that you need for infrastructure and large structures.
Right.
While aluminum's lightness and conductivity make it really important for transportation and electronics.
Yeah.
So they're both vital.
Right.
But they're used for different primary applications.
Just sure. And that's all because of, California's diverse economy.
Absolutely.
So it's fascinating to see how, these different industries are driving the demand for these materials.
Yeah, and we've got all these big projects and trends that are going to influence consumption even more in the future.
Oh, yeah.
The Mojave micro mill,
Right.
the push for green building,
Yeah.
EVs,
Yeah.
renewable energy targets, rebuilding after wildfires, green steel development.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. It's a really dynamic landscape.
It is, for sure.
Yeah.
So it sounds like California's major industries are relying heavily on both steel and aluminum,
Oh, yeah. They're both essential.
with construction and transportation really dominating. But all these emerging trends in sustainability and technology, they're
Right.
really shaping, what the future demand is going to look like.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, as California continues to push for these green initiatives
Mm-hmm.
and all this technological innovation, how is that balance between steel and aluminum consumption going to change in the next decade?
Right.
And what kind of new applications are we going to see for these materials?
That's a great question.
Yeah. It's something to think about.
It is something to think about.
For sure.
That's it for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
It was fun.
Absolutely. All right,
Yeah.
we'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.